order is not considered final if time remains for an appeal or application for discretionary review with respect to the order. C. Preliminary funding. 1. Use of imminent threat grant amounts of any amounts made available in subsection A. 4. B. And in consultation with the Department of the Interior, the Secretary may award preliminary grants of up to $2 million each to applicants that have applied for a grant under subsection A. 4. B. before making a final determination as to whether to award a grant under subsection A. 4. B. to such applicant. 2. Need and capacity. Prior to awarding a preliminary grant under this subsection, the Secretary must determine, based on a preliminary assessment of need and administrative capacity, that the applicant is likely able to carry out the grant successfully but would need additional administrative and planning resources to develop a comprehensive implementation plan and additional administrative capacity in order to successfully administer a grant under subsection A. 4. B. 3. Eligible activities. Such preliminary grants shall be used for eligible program activities, as defined by the Secretary, that the Secretary determines will allow the applicant to successfully implement the grant. 4. Inapplicability. Such preliminary grants are not subject to administrative and planning caps. 5. Funding determinations. The determination of whether to award a final grant under subsection A. 4. B. to an applicant after preliminary funding was granted to an applicant shall not be subject to review. D. Reallocation amounts made available under subsection A. 1. that are not accepted within a time specified by the Secretary, are voluntarily returned, or are otherwise recaptured for any reason may be used to fund grants under paragraph 3 or 4 of subsection A. E. Waivers. The Secretary may waive or specify alternative requirements for any provision of NHASDA 25 U.S.C. 4101 et seq. Title I of the Housing and Community Development Act of 1974. 42 U.S.C. 5301 et seq., or regulation that the Secretary administers that is applicable to such statutes other than requirements related to fair housing, non-discrimination, labor standards, and the environment, upon a finding that the waiver or alternative requirement is necessary to expedite or facilitate the use of amounts made available under this section. F. Implementation. The Secretary shall have authority to issue such regulations or other notices, guidance, forms, instructions, and publications as may be necessary or appropriate to carry out the programs, projects, or activities authorized under this section, including to ensure that such programs, projects, or activities are completed in a timely and effective manner. Subtitle B21 St. Century Sustainable and Equitable Communities Sec. for 0101. Community Development Block Grant Funding for Affordable Housing and Infrastructure. A. Appropriation. In addition to amounts otherwise available, there is appropriated to the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, in this section referred to as the Secretary, for fiscal year 2022, out of any money in the Treasury not otherwise appropriated. 1. $6,600 million for grants to grantees under Section 106 of the Housing and Community Development Act of 1974. 42 U.S.C.5306, under the Community Development Block Grant Program under Title I of such Act, subject to subsection B of this section, except that for purposes of amounts made available by this paragraph, paragraph 2 of such section 106A shall be applied by substituting $70,000,000 foot for $7,000,000 to $1 billion for assistance to community development block grant grantees, as determined by the Secretary, under Section 106 of the Housing and Community Development Act of 1974, 42 U.S.C. 5306, only for colonias, to address the community and housing infrastructure needs of existing Colonia residents based on a formula that takes into account persons in poverty in the Colonia areas, except that grantees may use funds in colonias outside of the 150-mile border area upon approval of the Secretary. 3. $500 million for grants under the Community Development Block Grant Program under Title I of the Housing and Community Development Act of 1974, 42 U.S.C. 5301 et seq. To eligible recipients under subsection D of this section for manufactured housing infrastructure improvements in eligible manufactured home communities. 4. $300 million for the costs to the Secretary of administering and overseeing the implementation of this section, the Community Development Block Grant Program, and the Manufactured Home Construction and Safety Standards Program generally, including information technology, financial reporting, research and evaluations, fair housing compliance, other cross-program costs in support of programs administered by the Secretary in this title, and other costs, and the Secretary may transfer and merge amounts set aside under this paragraph to Section 40301. And 5. $100 million for providing technical assistance to recipients of all applicants for grants under this section. Amounts appropriated by this section shall remain available until September 30, 2031. B. Housing construction expenditures on new construction of housing shall be an eligible expense for a recipient of funds made available under this section that is not a recipient of funds under Title II of the Cranston-Gonzalez National Affordable Housing Act, 42 U.S.C. 42 U.S.C. 12721 et seq. C. Manufactured Housing Community Improvement Grant Program. 1. Establishment. The Secretary of Housing and Urban Development shall carry out a competitive grant program to award funds appropriated under subsection A. 4. To eligible recipients to carry out eligible projects for improvements in eligible manufactured home communities. 2. Eligible projects. Amounts from grants under this subsection shall be used only to assist in carrying out a project for construction, reconstruction, repair, or clearance of housing, facilities and improvements in or serving a manufactured housing community that a. is critically needed to protect the health and safety of the residents of the manufactured housing community and the long-term sustainability of the community. B. Can be commenced expeditiously assisted by a grant under this subsection. And C. Includes activities I. Eligible under the Community Development Block Grant Program under Title I of the Housing and Community Development Act of 1974, 42 U.S.C. 5301 et seq. Two. To facilitate installation, including foundation construction for new manufactured homes, as defined in Section 603 of the National Manufactured Construction and Safety Standards Act of 1974, 42 U.S.C. 5402, and regulated under associated regulations, and previously sold certified manufactured homes. Or 3. To mitigate flood risk. 3. Criteria. The Secretary shall prioritize awards under this section by the extent to which the project will assist low-income families and preserve long-term housing affordability for residents of an eligible manufactured home community. D. Waivers. The Secretary may waive or specify alternative requirements for any provision of Title I of the Housing and Community Development Act of 1974, 42 U.S.C. 5301 et seq., or regulation that the Secretary administers in connection with use of amounts made available under this section other than requirements related to fair housing, non-discrimination, labor standards, and the environment, upon a finding that the waiver or alternative requirement is necessary to expedite or facilitate the use of amounts made available under this section. E. Definitions. For purposes of this section, the following definitions shall apply. 1. Colonia Area. The term Colonia Area means any census tract that a. is an area of the United States within 150 miles of the contiguous border between the United States and Mexico, except as otherwise determined by the Secretary, and b. lacks potable water supply, adequate sewage systems, and lack of decent, safe, sanitary housing, and other objective criteria as approved by the Secretary. 2. Eligible manufactured home community. The term eligible manufactured home community means a community that a. meets the affordable housing safe harbor requirements of the Internal Revenue Service under Section 601. (201) of Title 26, Code of Federal Regulations, and b. I. is owned by the residents of the manufactured housing community through a resident-controlled entity, as defined by the Secretary, in which at least 2/3 of residents are member owners of the landowning entity, or 2. the Secretary otherwise determines is subject to such binding agreements as are necessary to ensure that the manufactured housing community will be maintained as such a community, and affordable for low-income families, as such term is